Kids Lab is dismissed at this time. Those of you that are smart enough to leave before I speak, you may go. I want to share a thought tonight. Wendell read from 1 Kings chapter 19, what I call beating the blues. Beating the blues. And song that's familiar to all of us, Blue Christmas, that was written by Billy Hayes and J.W. Johnson. And Ernest Tubbs is the first one to record this written song in 1948. But we all know the version that Elvis Presley, his take on it in 1957. In fact, if someone mentions Blue Christmas, who's the first to sing it, they would say Elvis Presley. And I always thought when I was younger, you hear all these spectacular songs and carols and just joy and cheer and happy. It's the most wonderful time of the year. And then all of a sudden, this comes on, Blue Christmas, and it sounds depressing. And you hear these ooh sounds to it. And you think to yourself, why is this in this catalog? Did someone mess up? How can anyone be blue? As a child, all children, do they not see? Is it joyful and exciting and just can't wait, and especially can't wait to be out of school and just can't wait to do all the activities? And as I got older, I realized that, yeah, there is some validity to that. It's not the most wonderful time of the year for a lot of people. It's not a joyous time of the year. I saw a post on Facebook of a dear friend of mine that says all I could do is this to the people that I love. It's tombstones of her burying her daughter and son, and it's a wreath and so forth. That's tough. As I visited Betty Graham last week, I don't know why she brought it up, but she mentioned to me, she said, Reese and I have been married for 64 years. And we struggle with this conversation. None of us want to go first. That's tough. That's a tough conversation. It's not joyous and happy and skipping and running and everybody, hey, just happy and joyful. It can be sad even during this time. And we as Christians, we are not immune from the blues, if you will, as in sadness and even depression. And it's interesting to know that even some of the Bible that we would consider great people that just doesn't seem human because the way we presented them and talk about them and learn from them, even they had the blues, if you will. I think about Moses in Numbers chapter 11. He had heard so much complaining from God's people. I mean, I don't know about you, but there's a certain limit of complaining that I can tolerate. And beyond that, I have to get away from it. Just imagine the multitude of complaining, so much that he said to God, kill me. Kill me. That's low, isn't it? Especially coming from the lawgiver and the mediator as we look at Moses. But he said it. Then I think about Jonah. After the greatest revival ever, it's bigger than Acts 2. What happened? The entire city repented in sackcloth and ashes. From the king to the very lowest person on the caste system or the social system there. And the very next day, he wanted to die. He was depressed. Woe is me, about how he looked at life and so forth. And God had to teach him another lesson. And then there is Elijah. And Elijah is an interesting individual. Here's an individual who's the first person in the Bible, going from Genesis, chronological order, that raised someone from the dead. He's the first person that said to do that. He's also the one that was privileged to be with Christ on the mountaintop as he was transfigured along with Moses. Interesting, two people that both had a blues moment where they both asked, I wish there's no reason why I should be here, just take me, but yet to be in that moment with Jesus. Elijah also never had a physical death, and that's a very, very rare group to be in. But in 1 Kings chapter 19, we see Elijah show something about himself that's very unusual to us as readers. It's a side that we've never seen before. Here's this just strong, faithful individual that has the faith to pray, and it begins to rain, and to stand before the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asheroth, and still have enough faith and believe it in God. And then very next chapter, he says, better for me not to live. Why am I here? I've disappointed my fathers. What just transpired? How did he get the blues? How did someone like the prophet of God gets the blues? Well, to go back and look, you'll notice that big showdown that took place. And in that showdown, it was Elijah, period, versus the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asheroth all together. And it was a showdown. Whose God is actually real and answered by fire? And they, to build their altars, and supposedly the real God would strike it and light that altar. And we know who won. Obviously, the God, the only God, prevailed that day. And it was a great victory for those who believed in God and those looking and seeing without a shadow of a doubt. The God that Elijah serves, the servant of that God, is real. Baal is not. But Jezebel gets a whiff of that, and she has her messengers to send whatever the God, she's still in this God's kick. Let them do to me what I'm about to do to you if you're not gone by this time. And he panics. He leaves. He runs. And we see him go downward in his bluesy moment, if you will. And so we see here a case of the blues. And it's really a step-by-step process how it can lead to someone to have such a great moment in one end to go to, on the other end, how he can go from there. And so the first thing I want you to notice is this. He wasn't thinking clearly. When he receives that message, what does he do? How does he respond to that? He runs the other way, doesn't he? He arises, he runs for his life. First of all, who sent the letter? Jezebel. What kind of person is Jezebel? Nothing that relates to the God. There's nothing about that message that involves God. There's nothing about her life that involves God. And so he wasn't focusing beyond that, you know what? I just have seen God in a very magnificent way demonstrate himself. I'm not worried about this letter. What's this letter to the God who answers by fire? But he doesn't think that way. In other words, God is not in control. It seems to be Jezebel by the way he acts, and he doesn't give a second thought to what these words are saying, and he runs, he leaves. He trusted God for so many years. And then he has this moment. Someone says if you've been kicked by a mule, don't let it bother you. Consider the source. Maybe you've heard that. When life kicks you down, consider the source. Is it greater than God? Does it should cause us to forsake God because it's more important than who he is? It's not, is it? Maybe Elijah should have prayed. And we all, again, I'm not harping on Elijah. He was a great person. But he's human. He's human. And we see his humanity here, just as we are. But maybe if you would have stopped and prayed and think about this for a moment. We get an email, we get a text, we get a phone call, we get something in the mail, and it alarms us, and we panic. We don't stop to think, wait a minute, time out. I know this is not good, but it sure doesn't beat God, and God is much greater. Do we ever think that way? The second thing that really, I think, led to him in that bluesy moment is this. He separated himself from others. He was alone. Look at verse 4 as was read. He left his servant, and he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. We need to be with people. We were made that way. We connect with one another. The church, and the glory of the church is it's a unit of people of like-mindedness and faith and love. And we lean on each other, and we are there for one another. We think about when Jesus selected his apostles. It was an even number. He sent them out in pairs by two. That no one was to go alone. Why is that? Because when life is hard, when life is difficult, when we are disappointed, when we are down and out because of who we rejected, by life, then we have someone to lift us back up. He removed himself from having that source of encouragement. He was by himself, and that's a scary place to be. When we are discouraged, when we are on the verge of being even depressed, the first thing, what we tend to do is we remove ourselves, don't we? We move ourselves to get away, to get alone, and that's the worst thing we can do. People with the blues are the people that are the most loneliest people. And you can be in a crowd of people and still be alone in life. The third thing that I see with Elijah is this. He was physically exhausted. He was emotionally spent. I mean, he has this great moment. Some time has transpired. Jezebel gets wind. He gets this message, and he just runs. He runs a day's journey into the heart of the wilderness. Boy, when you've been going and going, and when you're intense, I mean, think about it. When someone threatens you, his senses have been heightened to the ultimate level, and he exhausts himself by running and running and running. He's worn down. He's spent. If we don't feel well, it's hard to talk to anybody. It's hard to get anything across. It's hard to consider anything rationally if we have forced ourselves beyond our normal limits. He was spent. And because of that, he obviously was in a bad situation that could be open to those things. You think about the timing of Jesus' tempter, and when he was tempted there. Was it when he was full of food? When it was he had a good night's rest and he felt really well? No, it was after he fasted 40 days and nights, when he was hungry, when he was exhausted physically, when he was spent. That's when he was tempted by the tempter that we read about in the three temptations, beyond the other temptations, where Elijah had replaced himself. And sometimes we're the most vulnerable times spiritually after things that take a lot out of us. We care, give for someone that we love. They're gone. We have a hole missing. We don't know what to do. We're lost. And we're like in a wilderness, if you will. And we feel we've spent, we're exhausted, we're tired, we're emotionally, we don't, again, that's a place where if we don't have people that can support us and love on us and bring us and have a group to be a part of that can, like the church, that strengthen us and can pray for us, then we're either going up or down, aren't we? The last thing is the most important thing for us to understand. He got lost in self-pity. He prayed. Now think about this. Look at verse 4. He prayed that he might die. This is a man that raised somebody from the dead through the power of God. When he had been dry for many years, prayed and it rained. Who did not even see physical death. Here he was before all of that moment. He's asking God to take his life. Have you ever prayed such a prayer? I haven't. You ever asked God to take your life? That's what he did. Self-pity is a dangerous emotion. It lies to us. It exaggerates something much more than what it actually is. It cultivates this mentality that I'm a victim. And because I'm a victim, it gets in our head. And it led him to wish to the point to where thinking a thought of death. Take my life. He even said in verse 4, I'm no better than my fathers. Did somebody tell him that? Did someone say, Elijah, son, when you get older, you have to be better than your fathers? If they did, we don't have it. And I don't think they did. I think it was Elijah telling himself that. He had built himself up in such a way and put this thought in his head that I'm just no better than people before me, and I just have failed, and so forth, so what's the use? So self-pity pollutes us, and it assumes what we ought to be. And Elijah needed God Elijah needed God to be the standard in his life. Elijah needed God to guide him in this moment of fear and this moment of panicking and this moment of dread and wanting to run away. So if Elijah is, if I can call it, get the blues, can get down, can get depressed, whatever you want to call it, then we are vulnerable as well as people. You can have the best day ever, but be exhausted and allow that to next day carry that into us feeling tempted, messing up, thinking things that are not true, exaggerating things, bringing into statements that no one's ever said, but thinking it's been said, and just, it's no wonder that even at a time of year where we're getting it advertised, it's great, it's joyful, we're hearing it 24/7 on a radio station, and it's just all over, but it's not like that for everyone. There's some people, I don't care if it's a joyous time of the year, the most wonderful time of the year or not, they still feel the blues. They feel down and out. And so we understand the case of it. We understand what is done. I love what God does to his servant here. And I think we need to look at it and examine it for us when it comes to dealing with people. Do you think, because of Elijah and his status, God should just come in there, wake him up and say, what are you thinking? Why did you say such a thing? You know better than that. He doesn't do that. Notice the first thing. God allowed Elijah to have time to rest. He sends an angel. And the angel sends and gives him food. And Elijah eats and rests for 40 days. That's how much he's been exhausted. That's how much he's spent. 40 days. Does that surprise you? 40 days of rest Elijah received, while 40 days Jesus spent fasting in the wilderness. It's the flip between Jesus and Elijah. He lets him eat. He lets him get food. He feeds him. There's no sermon here. There's no rebuking. There's no lightning bolt. There's no earthquake. There's nothing saying, Elijah, what are you doing? He's exhausted. He's fatigued. And that's a dangerous place to be in. He strengthens him physically with food, and he allows him to rest and relax. We try to tell people that have gone through things, you just need to rest and relax, and sometimes it's easier said than done, but if they could do that, that's the best thing, isn't it? To rest, to relax, to renew your body, to renew yourself mentally and spiritually. God allows him to do that for 40 days before he says anything to him. He questions him or brings him back to reality, brings him back to a place where he needs to be mentally. He gives him that time. He's patient. Oh boy, are we as patient as God is? I don't know. Are we patient with people that we don't understand why they feel the way that they feel? How could they feel that way when there's so much good around them, when they love God? And how can they feel down and out? And how can they feel depressed and feel bluesy in life when it's such... We don't know what it is like to be in their shoes, do we? Think about God and his patience that he has. The second thing he does is this. He communicates wisely to him. Look what he says in verse 9. And there he went to a cave, and there spent a night in that place. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? That doesn't sound harsh, does it? Doesn't sound like an angry, a wrathful God that you mess up, you think something negative, you say something that you shouldn't say or pray, then I'm going to strike you down. No, it doesn't sound like that. And we're in the Old Testament. What are you thinking? Why are you here? Or doing here, Elijah? It's a simple question. Elijah, how does he respond? He responds to God like anybody that has self-pity. I've been very zealous for you. I've been the best worker. I've done the best of the best. I've gone this far, farther than anybody else. There's no one else like me here. I've done all this, and yet this to happen. That you allow these things to happen. I killed the prophets, and I'm alone and left that seek to take my life. I'm the last person standing, if you will. He believed the lie that he was alone. Woe is me. There's no one that can relate to my circumstances. There's no one that has gone through than what I've gone through. There's no one that's been through than what I've been through. There's no one to face the things that I've faced in my life. God lets him say what he has to say. He's like with kid gloves, if I may say that with God, just slowly bringing him to where he needs to be. Letting him getting it out, even though he knows he's not the only one. He's far from the only one. There are a lot of people just like him who are fighting for their faith, living in a very sinful, dangerous time. He's patient. God drew Elijah out of the cave. That's what I love. Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord in verse 11. Get out of that inside of the cave of depression, of bluesiness, of self-pity. Come out. Come out of that. Come out and stand before me. Come out into the place of encouragement where you can feel and see the presence of God. He drew him out of that self-pity and that discouragement and that depression. And in verse 13, after doing these things, behold, the Lord passed by, and great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces. What a great visual display, again, that God permits his servant to see. After the fire, when the altar had been soaked in water. Again, he says that the Lord was not in the wind and the earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Verse 13, when Elijah heard that, he wrapped his face in the mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Again, that question. Elijah was still feeling what he was feeling because of the letter of a godless woman and what she had to say. Again, God showed Elijah that you're not alone. You have a job to do. I'm not going to answer that request, absurd request. Take your life because you've gone as far, and woe is me. There's still a place for you to do what you need to do. And God responds the same way. Lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age, Jesus said. He himself has said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Again, God reminding us, I'm with you. I'm here. I'm among you. I haven't left you. I haven't forsaken you. I haven't called you to follow me only just to let you go and just do your own thing by yourself with no help. We allow the world to put things in our mind, and we allow Satan to do a good job in tempting us in thoughts. That God has allowed Satan to put us in a place that's at a very hard place for us to get out of. We can come and we can smile, pretend like we're smiling, and pretend like everything's going right in our life, when on the inside we're crumbling downward. The last thing that I believe that God did for Elijah was he gave him a personal friend, the one that would take over, his mentee, if you will, Elisha. But he needed Elisha at that moment. He needed someone that he could confide in. He needed someone that could relate to what it's like to be a prophet of God, a true prophet of God. And Elisha would be that person for him in that transitional period before God would call him up. And so when I think about these things, as we see the downwardness of Elijah, and then we see God, how he dealt with this prophet that was feeling the blues, how he brought him up, is a good lesson for all of us. And it's for this: we need to be mindful of others. Everyone. There's not a person, whether they're present, whether they're unable to be here, that should not be forgotten. We need to be mindful. There is an important power in letting people know that we care, to letting people know that we pray for them, to letting people know, whether we see you 3 days a week or whether we don't see you at all, that we are mindful of you, especially this time of year, because it seems this time of year it can be the most demanding, because we see it in the films, we see it on TV shows, in the cards. Everyone's together, everyone has their family, and everyone's happy and joyous making memories, and it's not like that for you. We need, as a church, to step up and really go the extra mile in being mindful for one another. I like the card idea. I like us having parties together and being together, and I like the idea that we can call and pray and send a letter to one another. That helps. It helps to know that the other people are thinking of us. It helped Elijah, and Elijah's not the only one that having someone that he can relate to. We are representatives. We are ambassadors of God, Christ Jesus. We are to do our best, as imperfect as that is, to do our best to let our light shine and to not only do good to the world, as we talked about this morning, but that verse also says, also to those who are the household of faith, especially to the household of faith. Don't forget your own. Don't forget your own family. Don't forget your own church family. If you're out there fighting and saving the world, don't forget those who are at home. Those who need encouragement. Those who need support. Those who need a friend. Those that don't need a rebuke, but just simply need, you know what, I'll pray for you. Those that you can be a listening ear to. If this time of year is a lot of things to a lot of people, to me what stands out, especially as a minister for 20 years, is this. There's a lot of people that need an ear to talk to. And especially at this time of year, they need that ear to talk to. Because it's really hard to see people that have a lot going for them when they don't. And a good way that we can help beat the blues in life is to be observant around us and to do our part to encourage. While it's still called today, encourage one another. How important that is. Alex has selected the appropriate song we're going to stand and sing. If we can help you, assist you in whatever way that is, we are here to help. Pray for you, to encourage you, to whatever needs you may have. It's sin in your life of a public nature, to pray publicly that God can heal you. We will do that. Or put on Christ. We will do that as well. Help assist that relationship between you and Jesus. Because at the end of the day, that's it. It's my relationship with God. When the last song is sung, the last prayer is prayed, when the last lights are turned out, it's that moment. It's my relationship with God. If we can help you with that, please come together. We all stand and sing.